Good morning. Welcome in. We will have Jeff Duncan live in the Bank Plus studio tomorrow. His new book, Peyton and Breeze, The Men Who Built the Greatest Offense in NFL History. Looking forward to having dinner with Duncan tonight. He's been covering the Saints for a long time. And then we'll have a little lunch tomorrow in the studio for some special guests. You can buy a book. He'll personally sign it. If you would like to jump in lunch tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the Bank Plus studio with us and Jeff Duncan, then shoot us a text. We'll see if we can get you in. Mississippi Ag John Deere Tractor text line is 601-885-3776. 885-3776. Interesting, something that we want to hit on at some point today is the fact how bad Auburn and Tennessee and Texas have been at developing their top-end talent, their 4- and 5-star players. It's almost like Auburn was able to overcome it to a certain extent and win a bunch of games. Texas and Tennessee, not so much. But isn't that interesting, Blake, that, Malzahn dinged Georgia several times and Bama, and he put he put Auburn in position to do some cool things at times. I mean, Tennessee's been awful. And Texas has been okay, but the Big 12's not any good. So even though they've had a good record under Herman, you still kind of ask the question, how do you have a losing record against Iowa State and TCU? Seriously, I mean, Iowa State's got a good coach. Matt Campbell's a heck of a coach. And Gary Patterson is a heck of a coach at TCU. I mean, these are good football coaches who have to do more with less. And I know, we don't always get into that and whatever. And I don't know how Matt Campbell is still at Iowa State. I would have thought by now someone would have picked him off. You go to Iowa State, you win. But, Gary Patterson decided he liked living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And he pulled a college baseball coach on us. Doesn't happen much in college football. Guys that win move. They try to go to the blue blood program. It wasn't either if Texas ever put out any feelers for him, he obviously respectfully declined to be the Longhorns coach. It's the only, there's something there. They like where they are. They treat him like a king. He's made a ton of money. Remember, they raised $180 million in like 5 minutes several years ago. And they've raised way more than that. But even though Texas and Texas A&M are the rich kids, TCU still has a ton of dough. But yeah, those are two guys that Texas has a losing record to the last few years.
Incredible. When I was growing up, Texas was perennially 10-2.
Yeah.
And, the question was, could they go undefeated to get to the BCS title?
Right.
Right. That was always the question. Not can they beat TCU, Iowa State, Oklahoma State. I mean, those teams were not even in the same conversation. They weren't even in the same breath as Texas when I was growing up. And now we're on a decade. I think if I remember, I'm trying to find the stat and I can't find it, but I think at one point Gary Patterson was like 8-2 against Texas over 10 games. TCU should never have a winning record against Texas, ever, over more than a one-season period.
And neither should Iowa State.
That's incredible.
Yeah. It's kind of like what's happened to Tennessee.
Except even worse, right? Because Texas was actually in line to be, like, they were a true blue blood, whereas Tennessee kind of was a pseudo blue blood,
No, that's
right?
a good point. They've never been a blue blood. They're in the next tier. They've been on the fringe and so on. But, yeah. And they play in a tougher conference. Even though the East is not the West, still, Tennessee plays they draw Bama every year, and they play in a tougher conference than what Texas has to go against.
Yep.
Now, Sark is going to turn that around, and soon. This will be one. You know how Urban Meyer did it? Year two at Florida. Saban did it in what, year 2 or 3 at Bama? He beat Tebow
3?
in year 2.
Yeah, but I think he won the whole thing in 3, right?
Okay. Did they go on and win it that year?
He
when
was
they
in
beat
he was in
Tebow?
7, right? And then he won his first one in 9. Didn't he?
Okay.
His first year was 7, and he won his first one in 9, I think.
All right. And they ruined Tebow's
Perfect. Yeah, his
opportunity
chance,
to go
yeah.
back to back.
Yeah, the crying SEC title game. I remember that. Yeah.
Think about that. Think about it took Saban 1 year to adjust to what Florida and Tebow were doing. 1 year. Isn't that right? Or was that year
correct.
3? Did Saban lose to them in year 2 and come back and beat them in year 3?
So
I may have that
Saban's
wrong.
first season, they go
6-6.
Yeah, 7-6 with the bowl game that they got rid of, right? And then they went 12-2 in year 2, and then in 2009 they were 14-0 and won the national title.
Was that the year he beat Tebow?
I think so.
Okay.
I think that's right.
We'll have to check that out. I say that Tebow and Florida, for that matter. But I think Texas is next as far as the team that's going to be in the conversation with Bama, Clemson. I guess Ohio State. I mean, I would think Ohio State.
They
right?
have to be by default. Who's going to beat them?
Right. And I guess if they're going to continue to kind of plug and play at the quarterback position, not saying that they'll always have a Justin Fields, but as long as they have a good player there, it doesn't even have to be elite, transcendent, first team All-American type guy, but a guy who can do a few things and then the talent around him, takes him like a tidal wave. Everybody's high on this Clemson quarterback. I heard a podcast with Dabo Swinney over the weekend.
You talking about DJ Uiagalelei?
Uiagalelei.
That's close. He threw for what, like 450 against Notre Dame or something like that? 500 yards? I mean, he chunked it around.
He did. What if he's the next guy? What if they don't miss a beat?
Isn't it just as likely that he steps in as it is Bryce Young or whoever's at Ohio State?
Because the ACC
aren't the formulas eerily similar, though, between those 3 programs? I mean, you insulate the quarterback with talent so that he doesn't have to be elite right away.
What if Dabo comes back and gets another one? That'll be his 3rd. Natty.
Steve Sarkisian's only had 1 losing season in his career. That was his first season at Washington. He left after 5 games at USC in 2015.
Oh, man, they took him out 5 games in?
Well, he took himself out.
I know. They did that with Kiffin and Sark
function,
like mid-season.
But he went to that He went to that alumni function
in August.
Trashed.
Yeah.
Just messed up. And so, that was bad. But, they do you think Sarkisian ever has a losing season at Texas?
No.
I tend to agree with you. They shouldn't.
I don't think so. Not with the cupboard's not bare. I mean, they've got a good roster, and he'll only make it better.
Well, that's what's remarkable is the numbers that we're referencing when it comes to NFL development is the article it's an article by Josh Vitale that we talked about last week, but it references this information, this data gathered that basically talks about how Texas has like 14.9% of their 4 and 5 stars make the NFL. It's like 20 out of 130 over a 5-year period.
At Texas?
Yeah. It's second. It's only second to Tennessee in terms of underdeveloping elite talent.
So Tennessee's number 1
at taking 4 and 5 stars and not getting them to the NFL.
Okay.
They're the worst team. They have of the top 15 recruiters.
All right, let's go backwards here.
They're the worst.
They had Jeremy Pruitt, and before that Butch Jones, and before that Derek Dooley, and before that Kiffin, and then before that Fulmer.
I think that's correct.
Okay, Kiffin was only there for a year. The Derek Dooley hire is, again, another former Saban assistant. I know we go through this. Muschamp, Pruitt, Derek Dooley. Whew. So now some work out, like Kiffin and Sark, but we'll see on some of the others. Boy, did you hear, who was it, the Texas Longhorns insider that we had on last week?
Mm-hmm.
He just threw A&M under the bus. I think there's a lot of resentment in Texas from A&M moving to the Southeastern Conference.
Yes.
And the fact that it's the big boy. and the Big 12 is actually losing ground as far as kind of
What's behind the ACC
revenue
now?
share. Yeah, you know, they're losing ground on being a part of the national conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to add some depth outside of Oklahoma and Texas. And I just don't know if they can with any kind of consistency. We'll see. Now, Sark takes them into the top 5, starts challenging Bama and Clemson. Then we've kind of got a triangle there, don't we? We have if you kind of want to go east to west, you've got Clemson, Bama, and if Texas joins the group, and then Ohio State. There's really nothing out west.
You push Oklahoma out already? Can Texas and Oklahoma compete in the same window?
I would think so.
To me, it should always come down to the rematch. In theory, because the Big 12 is so weird. They only have 10 teams, or 9 now. I can't even remember. 10, something like that.
I think they have 10.
10, and they play 9 conference games.
Kansas doesn't count, but go ahead.
So you automatically get a rematch in the Big 12 title game. 3 out of 4 years, it should be a rematch between the Red River rivalry. It should be Texas and Oklahoma matching back up because they should both be. One should be 12-0 or 11-1, and the other should be 11-1 or 10-2 at worst, depending on who their non-con P5s are.
Yeah.
So you should see Sark and Riley playing each other twice a year, 3 out of 4 seasons.
Well, I'll take that. That sounds good to me.
And that means they're both that means they're competing in the same window for that CFP spot because usually the winner of the Big 12 is going to make the CFP.
All right. Well, speaking of, what was Georgia thinking scheduling Clemson?
I mean, A&M did it too. What was Bjork thinking scheduling Louisville on a neutral site? That's a winnable game, but it's still losable. As Bartu says, why give yourself more chances to screw up? When you're in the SEC and your program, like your SOS, your strength of schedule, your rankings will always be high. You could play 4 high school teams and you'd still have a strong strength of schedule.
McGarity is their former AD at Georgia. That's bad scheduling.
It's not bad scheduling. It's atrocious scheduling.
It doesn't matter. Like, you can beat Clemson week 1, and everybody will get all hot and bothered over it. And it'll be the biggest win of week 1.
But if you lose to Florida 4 weeks later, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. If you don't win the East, because you already got Georgia Tech, so you've already checked the box of the mandated non-conference Power 5 game. You play Georgia Tech every year, and you're not gaining anything from playing Clemson.
It's only a negative outcome because here's what happens. Either way, whether you win or lose, you take a massive physicality hit on your schedule that you don't need to take, and you take it in week 1. If you win that game, expectations are that you go undefeated. So now pressure's really on you. If you lose that game, fans are upset because you lost to a talented team that you think you should be competing with on the national stage, and it sets up for your pressure to be up for the rest of the season either way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lose. There's no way you come out with a win out of this situation.
Terrible scheduling by Miami, too. The Hurricanes scheduling Bama in week 1. That's a great way to set up Manny Diaz to fail because you gain. I mean, look, if you upset Bama, it's huge. But if you don't win the AC, if you don't go and get Clemson at some point, then at the end of the day, what are we really accomplishing?
Yep.
We won a big game in week 1. Okay. That wears off.
It's like Parrish said about the Vanderbilt series. If you don't finish the deal, then this series just becomes a fun weekend. It's not anything meaningful.
Right.
You have to build on it.
So you're the Miami Hurricanes. You're trying to get a foothold back in the conversation.
First time in what, 15 years?
Yeah. And you schedule Bama? What are we doing? It's crazy. For us, it's great because it may be a close game. Maybe. I mean, do I expect Bama to win? Sure. Clemson, Georgia could be a fantastic game. I'll take it. LSU at UCLA. I'm just going over week 1 games. It's Louisville, Ole Miss. This is in no order. Louisville, Ole Miss, neutral site. LSU at UCLA. Alabama, Miami, neutral site. Clemson, Georgia. Blake, is that in Charlotte or is that on somebody's campus of the Clemson Tigers or the Athens, Georgia Bulldogs? Either way, those are the big week 1 games to kick off the season. Georgia Clemson is the monster. What do they really have? JT Daniels, ton of talent coming back.
That's the one at Charlotte.
Florida should take a step back. Okay. Georgia Clemson to kick off the year. And it's in Charlotte?
Yeah, it's the Panthers Bank of America Stadium.
Yeah. All right. And then Bama, Miami, neutral field. Ole Miss, Louisville, neutral field. And then LSU at UCLA. UCLA is so far behind LSU out-recruits them by like 40 spots. But does Chip Kelly finally have his QB? And they landed like 8 or 9 transfers. One from Bama, one from, some big school. You don't ever know. Again, more times than not, they're not going to work out. But Chip Kelly was on a podcast recently saying, hey, we're in a better spot. We're going to use the transfer portal. Does he have his QB with some playing time under his belt now to give LSU some problems with the first-year defensive coordinator? Does LSU have more talent? Yes. Line of scrimmage, should LSU, do we even need to worry about them throwing the ball? Could they pin their, UCLA and those teams are usually small in the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the football, right? They're more 260, 270, maybe 280. And so does LSU just go out there, and even on a year where Ogeron's saying, hey, we're going to get our mojo back and throw it around, can LSU just line up, pound UCLA at UCLA, and end up winning by 21 and get out of there with a dub? Or is Chip Kelly going to run them sideline to sideline and score with LSU? Boy, can you imagine if Ogeron drops that game?
I was about to say.
Because UCLA hasn't been any good in, my whole life. Donahue. Terry Donahoe. Yeah. Had a few good years. What was that guy's name? Bob Toledo? He ended up at Tulane, believe it or not. They fired Toledo, kind of like they fired Ben Howland. They didn't know what they had. Toledo actually won some games for UCLA. And then Neuheisel and Mora recruited well, but could never get it going. That's such a, I guess, just soft, disinterested program. But that's one to keep an eye on, going all the way out to L.A., first game of the year. It won't be a crowd, so you don't have to worry about that. Who knows with California? They may only let 2,000 people in anyway, but only 6,000 people go to UCLA football games. So there could be more LSU fans there, depending on their COVID plan, than UCLA fans, because they're not in and they don't care. Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, brought to you by Mississippi Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center. Any age, any sport, any injury, they've got you covered at Mississippi Sports Medicine and MississippiSportsMedicine.com. We'll go to the Mississippi Ag text line. We're going to have to move Luginbill to another time slot. And I'm not sure when that'll be, but we'll figure it out and go from there. Gator Matt on the Mississippi Ag text line says Emory Jones for Heisman.
Yeehaw.
That is Dan Mullen's new quarterback. Now, Anthony Richardson's kind of right there. Another recruit that they like. But he's young. And so Emory Jones is the new dude at Florida. I don't think he's anywhere close to that, but I think Dan will get the most out of him. What that is, I don't know. He'll get way more out of him than Ohio State would have, just because Dan is that way, an excellent QB coach.
Emory Jones, 40-1 odds for the Heisman. That is tied for 15th among college players.
Who's number one?
Spencer Rattler. Right behind him, DJ Uiagalelei. And then right behind him
is Matt Corral.
JT Daniels.
Well, that's a terrible
Matt Corral
list.
is 20-1. So you can still get Matt Corral.
That's not bad.
You can still get Matt Corral 20-1.
That's not bad. Matt Corral is 20-1 on the Heisman?
Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
If Matt Corral won a Heisman,
all right,
and Ole Miss went to a
New Year's Six
yeah,
bowl game.
they go like 9-3, right?
Okay.
10-2 got you in the playoff, but I don't say they don't make the playoff.
Okay.
Not playing for. We'll take the national title out of the picture.
All right.
Say they're playing a New Year's Six bowl and he wins the Heisman.
Mm-hmm.
Is Matt Corral going to take a step ahead of either Manning?
No.
So is there anything anyone could do to take a step like?
No.
So even if he won a national title,
if Arch Manning signs with Ole Miss,
but he's a Manning, so it doesn't count.
okay.
I'm saying
Well,
outside
then
a Manning name.
to answer your question, even if Matt Corral wins the Heisman,
What if he won a national title?
well, they're not.
But if he wins the
Okay,
Heisman, they're in the chance. That means they're in some type of conversation.
No, RG3. There's been a few.
RG3 and Manziel are the only two that I can name off the
Two.
top of my head.
Yeah. And A&M,
Was kind of, but
look,
not really.
they should have gone to the college football playoff that year. They end up going to the Cotton Bowl and boat racing Oklahoma and finishing 11-2. I could make the same argument for Ole Miss in 2015. They could have easily been in and competitive in the college football playoff with the team that they had, but they dropped weird games to Memphis and Florida. I don't know. Okay, it happened. Back to what you're trying to frame up. If Matt Corral has this super special season and wins the Heisman and goes to a New Year's Six bowl game, does he trump Eli and Archie? Absolutely not.
So you're saying you
Because
would
they
have
are
to win.
royalty to the utmost extent.
But he would be he would be infinitely more successful than either
Well,
of them,
now
wouldn't
both
he?
of them had great careers. And just because Eli didn't win it doesn't mean he wasn't worthy of winning.
I understand. We've had plenty of worthy people not win awards. I understand that. I guess my question is there any opportunity for that? Or is it just like you go ahead and etch it in stone? There's no way anyone could be better.
No.
Because like I still.
And by the way, Arch Manning, they've dropped some recruiting lists. I think Ole Miss is the team to beat. People are talking about how, and don't get me wrong, Texas and Clemson and Bama, and I guess LSU, but Cooper Manning will not let him play for Ed Ogeron, in my opinion.
Texas would be huge.
Texas
Yeah.
with Sark, Ole Miss with Kiffin, if they're all still there, Dabo with Clemson, and I guess Saban with Bama would be in the mix. But I still think that Ole Miss is the team to beat. And I know that's a couple of years away, but I'm thinking that I think Cooper Manning would love to live that 4 years of, I mean, even more, kind of royalty, if you will.
You're saying Cooper move into the square?
Well, I'm sure he's already got a place there. But Arch Manning, 2 years from now, will sign somewhere. The Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, is brought to you by Juniker Jewelry Store. Oh, man, engagement rings. Juniker Jewelry Store. Engagement rings, that is the go-to place. John and the team at Juniker Jewelry in Madison will take care of you. Hour number 3 coming up.